I'd like to welcome you back. This is the seventh of the videos that we have produced for the children of our church during this shutdown period. And this week we have something special for you. Miss Claire was not able to record the final portion of Ringu this week because the Lord had something different for them. With all the rain, their basement flooded. But in her place this week, Miss Eileen Berry, who has authored several books for children and young people, is going to read one of her books for us, Roses on Baker Street. And I know that this will be a blessing to all of you, and many of you know Miss Eileen because she teaches in our 3-year-old Sunday school. And then following Miss Eileen, Dr. Lovegrove is going to bring us Commandment 7 of the 10 Commandments.
Today I'm going to be reading a book that I wrote called Roses on Baker Street. Mama drove us to school that first day. As we drove up Baker Street, I looked out at the American houses and the American lawns. There were no roses wandering up stone walls. There were no sheets of lace fluttering at open windows. There was no village church with a bell tower. There wasn't a single person carrying a long, skinny loaf of bread. I knew I was far from home. The American school was bigger than my school in France. I found my desk in the back row of the class. The girl on my right folded the pleats of her plaid skirt into a fan. The girl on my left twirled her long blonde braid around her finger. The boy in front of me pooched out his lips and tried to balance his pencil on them. I sat still like a rabbit sits while it is deciding whether to run. Mrs. Blim's eyes looked as if she knew a wonderful secret. "Class, Danae has come a long way to be with us," she said. "Danae, please tell the class where your family lives and what they do." The two girls looked at me. The boy turned all the way around in his chair and dropped the pencil. I stood. "My family is American," I said. "But we live in France to tell the people there about Jesus. My papa pastors a church in the village, but we came back to America to rest this year. We moved into a house on Baker Street." I did not say that I thought a year was too long to rest. "Who would like to ask Danae a question?" Mrs. Blim asked. The girl in the plaid skirt raised her hand. "Do you speak French?" "Yes." The girl with the blonde braid was next. "Do you have a best friend in France?" "Yes. Corinne is her name. She's French." Even the boy had a question. "Your name's hard to remember. Do you have a nickname?" I wrinkled my eyebrows and thought, "Not an everyday one, but my papa has a special name for me. He calls me mon petit chou." "What does it mean?" My face felt hot, even my ears. In English, it's not the same. It means my little cabbage. The girl in the plaid skirt giggled. The girl with the blonde braid giggled. In a moment more, the whole class was giggling. "In France, those words mean sweetheart," said Mrs. Blim. "Thank you, Danae, for telling us about your special name." Plaid skirt and blonde braid sat across from me at lunch. Another girl with big eyes like melted chocolate sat beside me. She didn't say much. Plaid skirt stood up to peer into my lunchbox. "Do you have French food in there?" "No, a sandwich on American bread." I took a bite of bologna and cheese. "Do you like it?" asked Blonde Braid. "Not as much as French bread. French bread is thick and hard on the outside. It makes you chew more. Plaid skirt and blonde braid looked at each other and giggled. Chocolate eyes smiled at me. Do French people eat lots of cabbage? Asked plaid skirt. Blonde braid giggled louder and put both hands over her mouth. I didn't answer. Blonde braid whispered in plaid skirt's ear. I looked away. Corinne and I used to tell secrets. At supper, Papa asked us how we liked school. My brother shoved his fork like a snowplow through his potatoes. He talked about math quizzes and book reports and soccer. My sister gnawed around and around and around her ear of corn. She talked about lockers and flute lessons and French club. I nibbled on bread, taking squirrel bites. I just listened. Mama asked me to help clear the table. Papa stayed too. I passed him with a stack of plates. He flipped my hair bow. What did you think of school, Danae? I handed Mama my plates. Not much, I said. Tell me the names of your new friends, said Mama. I wrinkled my eyebrows and thought of plaid skirt and blonde braid and pencil boy and chocolate eyes. I hadn't even learned their names. I don't remember, I said, but there were no Corinnes. Papa sat down in a kitchen chair. He pulled me onto his lap, even though I'm big now. Mon petit chou, he said, changes are hard. But look for the roses, not the thorns, okay? Look for the roses. I wanted to tell him there were no roses in America, at least not on Baker Street. I had already looked, but I felt like a baseball was stuck in my throat. I pushed my face against his soft shirt and said nothing. The next day I walked to school looking for roses. I saw tall white flowers around a tree. I saw roughly red flowers in a window box. I saw purple flowers in stone pots on a porch, but no roses. At school, Mrs. Blim wrote bonjour and au revoir on the chalkboard. I told the class that bonjour means good day and au revoir means goodbye. We all laughed when they tried to say the words. They sounded American. I learned that plaid skirt was Tara, blonde braid was Heather, pencil boy was Matthew, and chocolate eyes was Katie. No one said anything about cabbage all day. After school, I started walking home alone. I kicked a pebble and thought of Corinne and France. The pebble skipped into the grass. Bonjour, Danae. A red tennis shoe rescued my pebble. It was Katie. She smiled, and so did her chocolate brown eyes. Bonjour, I smiled back. I live on Baker Street too, she said, number 44. I live in 67. Will you stop by my house? Asked Katie. My mom can call your mom to tell her you're here. You'll like my mom. She makes flowers. Outside Katie's house were big, bunchy bushes and a tall tree, but I didn't see any flowers. Katie's mom didn't come to the door. Katie ran through the living room and I followed. She ran down the basement steps. I stopped in the doorway. Everywhere were roses. Roses swung from ropes on the ceiling. Roses lay in baskets on the floor. Roses bloomed from glass bowls on a table. Wreaths of roses hung in rows on every wall. Red roses, yellow roses, pink roses, purple roses. They looked so real that I touched one. It wasn't real. It felt like ribbon. All the roses were made out of ribbon. Silky ribbon, stiff ribbon, fuzzy velvet ribbon. Katie's mom sat at the table, winding ribbon around a thin stem and gluing it in place. She was making a rose. Katie whispered to her mother. Then she grabbed something from the table. Mom calls these cabbage roses, she said. We wanted you to have one. She handed me a hair barrette. It had a big red rose on it, open and full. The rose looked like it had grown right there on the barrette. Thank you, I said. I pinned the barrette in my hair. And right then I knew what Papa had meant about roses. He didn't mean for me to look for real roses. He meant looking for the good things, like chocolate brown eyes and smiles, like friends. I couldn't wait to tell Papa. I had found roses right here on Baker Street.
We have come to the 7th commandment. This commandment is, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." What does this commandment mean? Well, when God created the world, he created 2 kinds of people, men and women. His plan was that they would get married and live together. He told them to be fruitful and multiply. That means to have children. God's will is for most people to get married and have children. At least 2 children. Why at least 2? Because someday the husband and wife are going to die. They will not live on this earth forever. And when they die, who will take their place? How will we continue to have an earth filled with people? Only if most married people have at least 2 children. That's simple math. If not, the population of the world will get smaller and smaller. So God said, no, don't do that. Be fruitful and multiply. Don't tell your math teacher, but I think of this like 1 times 1 equals 2. 1 man and 1 woman multiply to have 2 children. Of course, 1 times 1 is not really 2, not in math. But that is God's plan for the world. Notice that I said this is God's plan for most people. Because this is not God's plan for everyone. God's will is for some people not to get married. God wants them to be single. In 1 Corinthians 7, Paul talks about this. He says that he is not married, and it is a good thing for him. He says that he wishes more people were single like him. But then he says that each one has his own gift from God. If God gives you a husband or a wife, that is your gift. If God gives you a life as a single person, that is also God's gift. But when this man dies, who will replace him? He will not have any children. Well then, some married family needs to have 3 kids then. Not everybody, but somebody has to have 3 kids to make up for the single people. That's simple math. However, God has a 3rd plan for some other people. God's plan for them is to get married, but not to have children. God did this to Hannah for a while. The Bible says that the Lord closed Hannah's womb. God made it impossible for her to have a baby. That is God's will for some people. But then who will take their place? See, somebody is going to have even more kids. This is God's plan for the world. Most people will get married. Most people will have children, 2, 3, or 4 children or more. So what's the problem? Well, God's plan is for only a husband and wife to have children. I have a question for you. Can you marry a tree? What if someone says, I like trees better than people. I want to get married to a tree. What will you say? I will say, that is silly. Of course you can't marry a tree. A tree can't talk to you. A tree can't live with you. You can't start a family with a tree. Trees don't have babies. Of course you can't marry a tree. But what about an animal? I love my cat. Can I get married to my cat? Do you remember in the Garden of Eden when God brought all the animals to Adam? God said that none of them were a good match for Adam. That's why God made Eve. She was the kind of partner that Adam needed. No, that's silly too. You can't marry an animal either. What if you want to marry another man? Well, we talked about this in Commandment 5. This is not a good match either. Two men cannot be a family. Two men cannot have babies. These things are not in the Ten Commandments. There is no commandment that says, "Thou shalt not marry a tree." Why didn't God say that? I think because we don't need a law. Because these things are just silly. It's impossible. It is obviously not going to work. But here is a problem. Here is why we do need a commandment. Because a man can have a baby with another woman. A man can leave his wife and go try to start a new family with another woman. And that is adultery. And God said, no. If she is not your wife, then no. Because God's plan is for only a husband and wife to have children. God's plan is for only a husband and a wife to live together and to be a family. When Jesus talked about this commandment, he said, don't even think about it. If you are even thinking about doing something wrong with a person that you are not married to, that is adultery. Someone says, I don't want to have a baby with her. I just want to be with her. No, Jesus said, don't even think about it. You stay with your wife. You stay with your husband. But what about before you are married? Sometimes a boyfriend and a girlfriend want to do things that only married people should do. They want to live together. They want to have a baby. They want to act like husband and wife. But they are not married yet. God says no. That is not God's plan either. We don't call this adultery. The old-fashioned word for this is fornication. We call these things sexual immorality. Do you know that word? Immoral means not moral, not right. This is not God's plan either. It is not right. Because, did I tell you this yet? God's plan is for only a husband and a wife to have children. Anything else is wrong. I have been talking about husbands finding another woman, but this can be a temptation for wives too. They can get interested in some other man that is not their husband. This is adultery too. Do you remember the Samaritan woman that Jesus met at the well? He told her, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. This is adultery too, and it is wrong. Don't even think about it. Why is adultery wrong? Well, it's not God's plan, and that's really the only reason we need to know. We are disobeying God if we do anything else. But here is another reason. Because when you get married, you make a promise. The preacher asks, do you promise to live together as husband and wife? And both people say, I do. I promise. Because marriage is a promise. The Bible word for this is a covenant. If you commit adultery, you are breaking your promise. So God said no. Don't break your promise. Do not commit adultery. That is the 7th commandment.